everybody. Hey, welcome. It's Matt again. Glad to see everybody here. Yeah, I hope you had a good week. We will be talking about a little bit about how the last week went. And yeah, I want to welcome you to the second session of the Agile MSP Bootcamp, where we're going to learn about Agile service delivery today. So we'll keep my eye on new folks that join, but I think we got enough here to get started. So yeah. Just as a reminder, if you don't mind, go on your camera. It's great to get feedback from you and to be able to see each one of you. And do feel free to just interrupt me with your questions and comments. And you can also put that in the chat there too. I'll try to remember to look at that from time to time. See if you put any questions in there. Okay, so something that someone once said about some of these techniques that we're teaching here is fellow Roman from a company called Raxos. He said a senior engineer was doing email setup and signature change tickets. With TopLeft, it was easy to identify the easy tickets that could be done by a junior tech. The engineer's work in progress was slashed from 50 tickets to 20. So that was, this is just an example of what some people, the benefit that some folks are getting out of working in a Kanban way. You know, either just visualizations from TopLeft Kanban boards or even better from getting into the techniques here. So you know, be able to look forward to getting that kind of benefit. So today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to be talking about using Kanban methods for triage and dispatch processes, and we're going to identify, teach about identifying and fixing problematic service tickets using a Kanban board. So definitely some of this stuff is just using kind of typical techniques that an MSP would use, no matter what sort of workflow that they're using, and some is specific to Agile stuff. But in any case, it's valuable stuff, I think, and I'll help you stay on top of your work. Okay, all right. Let's look back at the last session. See if you remember some of the things that we talked about last week. One was visualizing work using the Kanban boards. Kind of just talking about what is a Kanban board. And so on. When we talked about when customers get the value from your work. So does anybody remember that when you consider the timeline that a ticket gets worked on, when does the customer actually get the value from that work? Anybody remember? At the end, yeah, I heard that. Very good, that's right. So all that customer, from the customer's perspective, ticket's not done at all until it's completely done. And that's why that's one of the reasons why we try to minimize that work in progress. So we deliver the value to the customer at a regular pace as soon as possible. So we also talked about free-for-all methods of management and Tetris management. That's where the free-for-all is just, hey, engineers take whatever tickets they want and just work however they want in getting those done. And Tetris management, on the other hand, is kind of getting into too much detail, trying to slot all of that work into an engineer's calendar, just kind of like a Tetris game. And that is error prone and takes an awful lot of work. So we don't do that. Agile replaces those things. We talked about how work in progress kills productivity. And we also talked about daily meetings, why you might want to start with a daily huddle, which is a very short daily huddle, and some of the good practices around that and how your daily huddles can be successful. So it's just a reminder of what we did last time. And I wanted to ask, how is that going? The specific homework I gave you was to review and improve your Kanban boards and also to start or improve a daily huddle. So I wanted to check in. Did anybody try any of those things? Looking at your Kanban boards and how they're set up, or starting a daily huddle?
Well, we do daily huddles in our company. We've done them forever. Definitely see the value in them. And we got access to Kanban boards this week.
Oh yeah.
So
okay.
yes, we had a look too.
Very good. Okay, so how did having the Kanban boards change those huddles?
We haven't incorporated them.
Okay.
No.
All right, so still a little bit of work to do there, but you got some good stuff to look forward to. Just recall that one of the good boards for using in a huddle is one with what we call the member swim lane. That's where the board is split up into horizontal groups, one after the other, one for each member of your team. And then it makes it really easy for them to see what they have in progress or is getting stalled or what problem tickets there could be that they can bring up and talk about. All right. Before we go on, was there any questions from the topics last week? Now that you've had kind of a week to think about it, did you realize, oh yeah, I got a question about some certain topic like that? Anything that I can answer right now based on what we learned last week? Nothing? Okay. No, it's no problem. Just toss something in the chat there or just interrupt me if you think of something, whether it's about last week or this week. Okay, very good. So let's get into this. Just as a quick reminder, these are the typical columns that we'll be working with on a board here: new and ready, scheduled, and waiting in progress and completed. This, we call these, just the generic statuses. Those stages work for all sorts of different processes at different companies. Today we're going to be looking at mainly the new and the ready and the scheduled columns. That's where the triage and dispatch most frequently works. We'll be getting to the other ones in a later session. So about triage, I wanted to bring up a couple points about triage. A lot of the times when people talk about triage and dispatch, they kind of talk about them almost as if they're interchangeable, almost the same thing, but they're not. And when we're thinking about stuff in detail like this, then we do need to consider them separately. Is there anybody who could offer a definition of triage? What's the goal of a good triage process?
Get the ticket classified properly and to the right person.
Okay. So you're onto a part of it, because getting it to the right person, that is the dispatch process. Triage is making sure, like you said, like it's a categorized properly. It's a good ticket, and also that we understand the urgency around it, and then getting it assigned to somebody, that is dispatch. So yeah, so my definition there is triage is to ensure that a ticket is a good ticket, especially when tickets automatically get into your queue, like when it comes in from the email connector or whatever. Then it's kind of a crapshoot if it's a good ticket or not, right? If it includes all the details that you need, and if the PSA has categorized things properly. So it's good to have a human look at that at the beginning, and then also just understand that what is the urgency on that ticket, because especially when tickets come in on their own, like from email, sometimes things are just fairly low urgency there, but sometimes something will come in and it's a fire that you got to fight right away. So it's good to have a human look at that. Although I understand also certain like AI and machine learning tools are getting pretty good at that sort of thing as well. But in any case, whatever tool is doing it, it's gotta work on that. So by the way, as far as agile workflows go, your triage might not need to change too much. So if you already have a really good triage process, you're going to keep that. It'll just kind of slot into the whole workflow a little bit differently, but generally speaking, all the things that you do in your good triage process, you're going to keep doing. So in particular, we want to make sure that certain fields on the ticket are set. So obvious ones are like the company and the contact. You want to make sure that the agreement is set. Other ones would be like the priority and the SLA coming from the priority. Certain fields that would vary by which PSA you're using, whether it's ConnectWise or AutoTask or something else, would be the like type and subtype and item and categorization department. Other ones might have like a configuration to apply to it. We also want to make sure that the description is clear and the title is a good title as well. And if not, then you're going to change those. when those are all set and it's been deemed to be a decent ticket that you can actually hand off to an engineer, then all you got to do is set the status to ready. Typically in a Kanban view, that could just be dragging the ticket over from new to ready, or changing the status. You can do all that in TopLeft. One note about who actually does that. Triage, I would say, is a responsibility that you need to fulfill within your team, but it doesn't necessarily need to be a person. So uh, you can you can sometimes change who's doing the triage responsibility. You could even some people do it like per week. There's somebody who's selected to be the triage person for that week. You could even rotate it by day. That's fine. It doesn't need to be a particular person. One thing that you might find is that as you go from using like not using agile techniques to using agile techniques, is that one thing you'll see is that the dispatch triage and dispatch process becomes awful lot easier. So sometimes your dispatch person is going to have other things to do. You don't even need a full-time dispatch person anymore when you did earlier. So that's a good change that can come from using agile techniques. How do you folks do the triage in a help desk? Do you have a dedicated person doing triage and dispatch, or is it kind of shared around?
Well, in First Focus, we have independent, oh, wouldn't say independent, but we have assigned techs who work on triage, but we also have a dedicated dispatch team. So aside from tickets, they also assign resources to sites for site visits and stuff like that. So they're actually two independent teams.
Got it. Okay, and that makes sense. I know that you're a large organization, so that makes total sense. They need to have a couple of teams or a team and others responsible for that. So as long as you got something that is appropriate for your size and complexity, that's the main thing. Okay, let's get over, and now we'll talk about dispatch. So dispatch is what determines who's going to work on that ticket and when. And this is kind of the main. Whereas with triage, if you got a good triage process, you're going to keep it. But dispatch, though, the agile stuff really changes around how the dispatch stuff works. It can be a big change for certain people if you haven't ever heard of that sort of techniques before. So in order to make it easy to understand, I like to compare it to some things that you might already be familiar with. So because there's a couple of options. There's kind of like three options, two that I'll present here. So this is what I call the technician queue, or there's multiple queues. So this is where each technician in your team would have their own queue of work. Basically, when the work gets in, the dispatch process assigns it to a particular member, and then they have their own queue of work. This is comparable, like, so I can compare it to something that you can actually see with your eyes. Is like when you go to a grocery store. I mean, hopefully it's the same in Australia as it is in Canada. Um, when you go to a grocery store, presumably you have a row of checkout counters, and when you're done shopping, you take your cart to one of the checkout counters. You basically pick which one you want to use. You get in that queue, and then you stay in that same queue until it's your turn to get served, and you get checked out. So that is that's actually very, very similar to how it is when work gets in an MSP. When work comes in, and at the sort of towards the beginning, as one of the first steps, it gets assigned to a particular technician, so that any particular technician can say, yes, this is what I'm working on, and uh, this is a queue of work that I have coming up after that. Okay, so that's one way to do it. The second way to do it is where we have I call it a team queue or a single queue. And that's where the work doesn't get assigned to any particular member until the very end. So here we'd have a queue of tickets that need to be done. And when a particular engineer here is finished with what they're working on, they just take whatever's at the front of the queue. It could be anything. And they pull it over and they begin working on it. Now, this also has a comparison to something that you might have seen. This is it hasn't historically been used very much, at least in my location in Canada, but it's becoming more widespread comparing to, say, like a grocery checkout or whatever. You might go into a store and there's still a whole line of checkout clerks for you, but there's not, each one doesn't have its own queue in front of it. There's a single queue that starts, somewhere in the store, and usually it is going to be kind of a long queue, so it winds around a couple of aisles or whatever, until you get to the front of the line, and only when you get to the front of the line do you get directed to one of the checkout clerks. So I don't know if you see that in Australia ever, but it's becoming more widespread here, and it's a pretty good method. There's some distinct advantages to it, and you might think you might end up in a really long line at the beginning, but despite if the line is long, it doesn't take long to get to the front of the queue because it just keeps moving very steadily. So in my opinion, it's actually a pretty good method. And so that would be directly corresponding to a technique where the dispatcher doesn't actually do any dispatching. They just put the work into a queue, like the main. There is some work for the dispatcher to do. They would still need to rank the tickets, and I'll speak more about that in a moment. But they don't actually assign the ticket to a technician. It just gets assigned to a technician at the very last moment. So I have a little more comparisons here. So in a technician queue, where each tech has their own queue, the decision about who to do the ticket is made early, kind of immediately after the triage happens. So that's why kind of triage and dispatch are kind of mixed in together sometimes. One of the benefits for having the technician queue is that uniform training and expertise in your team is not required, because a dispatcher can actually look at the nature of each ticket that comes in and says, okay, this is a kind of a senior level ticket, and then it's going to get, so I see that I need to assign it to one of the senior members or somebody who has particular expertise in a certain technology or is more familiar with that particular customer or whatever. There can be a whole variety of reasons that a ticket might go to a particular person. So with a technician queue, that's possible. With a team queue, that's not possible. That's where the who does this ticket, where that decision is made at the last possible moment. Benefits of that are that it's more predictable, because a new ticket will get started anytime any technician becomes free, because it's not waiting for any particular technician. Just anytime any technician is free, the next ticket will start. So that means that if a particular technician ends up working on something that's particularly difficult, and it's taking 3 times as long as you thought, it has no, or I should say, very little impact on the whole queue of tickets. Whereas if the technician has his own queue of tickets, then if one of those tickets ends up taking a lot longer, then the whole queue gets delayed. So because of that, the team queue is more efficient than the technician queue for 2 reasons. One is it just eliminates some of the work the dispatcher has to do. They don't have to dispatch it to a particular person. Also, there's less monitoring that needs to be done throughout the day, because you pretty much don't even need to monitor the team queue. It's just always going to keep moving. It would only slow down if a lot of your engineers are blocked on something, which is going to be pretty rare. So a couple other notes about this. I don't want to minimize the uniform training and expertise requirement. That is kind of a big requirement, and so I don't want to just kind of hand wave it away and pretend that it's easy to do that, because it's not. That is always a big challenge in a team, is just making sure that you got a decent kind of base level of expertise, as new people join your team and other people leave and you lose that expertise. So that is difficult. One thing is that one way to help manage that is that a hybrid method is possible. And so that's where you would only assign the work when that particular ticket requires some specialized training or knowledge about a technology or knowledge about a customer. So kind of by default, tickets would go into the team queue. But if a certain type of ticket arrives and dispatcher observes that, yeah, not everybody in the team can do this ticket, then it gets assigned to a particular member. So that's fine. So you kind of mix and match where you need to with these methods. And by the way, if I say that and you're kind of thinking, well, isn't that support, like support tiers? Well, yeah, that is kind of like support tiers. So this does interact with that sort of thing, where you can actually have multiple tiers maybe you got, your tier 1 and 2 and 3. Within each one, you could just use a team queue because, within each tier, you have a fairly uniform level of training and expertise. Obviously not between the tiers. That's the whole point of having that. But within each tier, you can have just a team queue. And so if you already have a setup of different tiers in your team, then it could be an easy change to make to do that. Now, if you're not already doing that sort of dispatching, my recommendation would be to first just do the technician queue, even though team queue has some big advantages. But technician queue is probably more similar to what you're already doing, and so that is what I would suggest to use. And then you can always move towards a hybrid method or go to the team queue method later when you're ready for that. So the second thing that a dispatch process involves is not deciding just who does it, but deciding when it gets done. So for that to know when any particular ticket needs to get done, we have to ask one question about it. One is, does it require coordination between multiple people? Usually the engineer and the customer would be the most common, but it could be with other people as well. It could be a manager, it could be a vendor or whatever. If it does require some coordination among people, then it needs to go into the calendar because they got to be able to meet at the same time to do whatever coordination they need. So if it does require some coordination, or I should also say, if there is some like real accepted reason that a ticket needs to be done at a certain time and day, such as some sort of like network cutover, and you got to ask the customer, okay, when can we do this cutover? Well, they give you a time, and that should go in the calendar. So those are really the only two reasons that you would ever want to put something in the calendar. And that's usually a minority of the work. So most of the work is not going to go in the calendar. Instead, on top in the Kanban board, this ticket is going to get ranked in a list of existing tickets, and that determines its priority and when it gets done. So we can't answer exactly what time of day it's going to get done. It's more in terms of it's going to get done when it gets to the top of the list based on its priority. So, some people have asked me in that regard, like, how does a dispatcher maintain control then, right? Because maybe they don't know anything except putting things into the calendar. So the calendar was how the dispatcher kept control over how the work got done. And they just don't know any different. Well, in Kanban, the equivalent thing to the calendar is the ranking of tickets relative to the other tickets. That is the control. And the reason it works is because engineers know that they work from the top of the list. So they get a queue, whether it's their own queue or a shared queue. They work from the top, whatever's always at the top of the list. Because when they take something, then there's going to be something else at the top of the list. So that is how they maintain the control, and that eliminates a lot of the disadvantages of the typical into the calendar dispatching method. So about the ranking, the typical ranking would be emergency tickets when they come in. Those probably actually go to the very top, and then they interrupt somebody. Basically, those are the things where we got to stop somebody working on whatever they're working on to take that emergency ticket. Big network outage, or major service down, or whatever it could be. Sort of the second priority, urgent but not emergency tickets, those would typically get ranked to the top of the queue. Meaning they interrupt. Well, I shouldn't say interrupt. They don't interrupt work. The technicians are able to finish what they're working on, and then they get to that new ticket, which is fairly urgent, so it's gone to the top of the queue. It's skipped the queue, and then normal priority tickets would typically go to the bottom of the queue. So most of the time, you're working sort of first in, first out. But some of those more urgent tickets get various levels of exceptions. Now, about the ranking criteria, basically, how do you rank? Maybe you need it to be a little bit more complicated than just looking at the urgency. Maybe there's like VIP users that get better service, or whatever it might be. Really, the ranking criteria is entirely up to you, because, like I mentioned there, it's okay to rank things straight to the top. That's totally permitted. Like, this is kind of one of the benefits of Agile, compared to calendar scheduling is that when you rank something to the top of the list, it just pushes the next thing, it just pushes it down. Uh, and that's all the rescheduling that needs to get done. Whereas if you're putting everything into the calendar, if you put something, if something needs to interrupt something else, then maybe you got to push all of the work back in the calendar. Maybe it's quite a bit of work to do that. So that's possible. So that's why Kanban is a lot easier in this sort of regard. And I mean, and then honestly, that's where the term agile comes from, is because it's just more able to roll with the punches. That's agile is a term for that. That's one of the reasons that where that comes from. Now, by the way, if you're not able to start using the Kanban dispatch methods right away, TopLeft still has a calendar dispatch tool. And so that means that you can actually begin to assign a member to a ticket, and it will, you just choose, well, from a particular ticket, you choose the member and you choose the day, and TopLeft will pull up what ConnectWise or Autotask knows about that member's calendar for the day, and it will mark off any times when they're already booked, so that you can put a ticket into somebody's calendar pretty easily from TopLeft. Now, just a couple notes about how the engineers work here. I mentioned it briefly, and we'll talk about it a lot more in the fourth session. But engineers, like I said, they work from the top of their queue, or from the top of the team queue. If they have both the team and the personal queue, then they would work from their queue first. When it's empty of work, then they would work from the team queue. But I want to mention they still work from their calendars. Kanban doesn't completely eliminate a calendar because, as I said, there's still certain types of work that does need to go into the calendar. So in practice, the calendar actually takes priority for an engineer. The engineer should first do what the calendar says to do. The difference compared to a like full-on dispatch method is that most of the time in their day, most of the time their calendar is going to be unscheduled. So instead of like 90% of their day being scheduled, maybe 10% of their day is going to be scheduled. So they still look at the calendar, see what's in there. They got to do the right things at the right times, but most of the day is unscheduled, so it does give them substantial time in those unscheduled periods. Then they're working through the queue of their work from TopLeft. And by the way, work can always go into the ready column, and then an engineer can work on it, and then it can go back to scheduled if necessary. Sometimes engineers need to work on maybe prepare some work or do part of work, but then the other part of the work then has to be coordinated with somebody, or it has to be done at a certain time. So it's totally fine for work to go from like from the ready queue into in progress. Engineer does some of the work, and then it goes into scheduled. Definitely doesn't have to always go straight to scheduled. Any questions about any of that right now? No? Okay, well, it's good, because now I'm going to show you. Let's take a little look at this, at how this actually works using a real life TopLeft board. So just orient myself here. So we got here a fairly typical help desk or dispatch board. So we would have the member swim lanes, typically like this one here, that shows us the tickets that are not assigned to anybody, called the no resource assigned swim lane. After that, we've got swim lanes here for Joseph and Cole and Greg, so we can see, and so on, and we can see the work of everybody in the team here. So work that comes out of that needs to be triaged would show up here in the no resource assigned swim lane in the new column. So this could have come in from the email connector or from a customer portal, or maybe somebody took a phone call and made a ticket and it ended up here. So to handle this for triage, you just simply click on the ticket, and brings up the editor here. You can check out, make sure that the ConnectWise, this is the ConnectWise example, so you make sure the ConnectWise board is proper. It's got the appropriate priority. You can read the description here and fix that up if you need to. And then some of these fields here will be important, like the company is definitely important. Contact is probably important as well. Agreement, ticket owner, type, subtype, item, maybe if you use those. So you look through those sorts of things here. And that would basically be your triage process. And you might just put it into the ready status. and then click here to save these. If you made changes here, you'd also want to save that if you made changes here. And then if we close, I won't actually save that, but if we close that, then we'd see that ticket move over here to the ready column. And then we would want to do the, well, that might be the end of it at that point. If we were using a team queue, then simply pulling it over here to the ready status, ready column, I should say, it might be all that we need to do. So I could just drop it there. And if we know that the engineers are working from that column, then that could be all that that could be our job done for that ticket. Now, if we're going to be assigning it to a particular technician, then there is going to be a little bit more work to do. So let me pull, and this can also be done here. So let's say that I had fixed up the ticket, save these changes to do with the triage process. If I then want to actually dispatch it to a member, I can do that from the dispatch tab here. So if all I want to do is assign a particular member, then I can just click their name here. And I can click assign, and that will assign them right away. Sometimes, though, I know that making that assignment is the last thing I want to do on that ticket. And then I'll go on to the next ticket. So I actually have a shortcut here. If I know that I want to assign Joseph, and then I want to change it to a different status, maybe I want to change it to ready because I haven't actually changed it to ready yet. I can actually do that if I click under here. I can click, just click ready. And then if I won't actually do it, but if I was to just click there, it would assign Joseph, it would change the ticket status to ready, and it would just close the dialog for me all at once. And then I'd find it, if I had assigned Joseph Atkins over here, then I would find the ticket over here, and then I can, it might be right at the bottom already, or I can, if I think, oh, this is actually kind of a higher priority ticket, I can go and drag it up to the top, or I can just click the menu here, click send to top or send to bottom. So there's a few ways to get that ticket fixed up for the triage process and then assigned to the member here if I don't need to put it into the calendar. Now, by the way, if I do need to put it into the calendar, then this is the tool that I was referring to here, where you can select a member and then select a day, and then ConnectWise will kind of preview what times of day this member is busy and what times he or she is free. And then I can just do a couple of clicks here to get that ticket scheduled into the calendar. By the way, I can also send a message to the technician here. If there's a little bit of context that they need for the ticket, you can write a little message here, and it will send that to them in their email when you assign that for them. So those are some of the tools that make this job easier in TopLeft. Any questions about that at all? No? All right, well, just interrupt me if you do have questions.
Sorry, actually, do you have like an overview of everybody's calendar on TopLeft? I think, how do I know that person is, I guess, booked for the next week? Or
Yeah, good question. That's not something that we have right now, but we would like to add that sort of thing in the future. So we're thinking about how we can do that. At the moment, you might just want to take a look in ConnectWise. There's some dispatch tools in there for answering that sort of question.
So if you were to book time and they've already had time booked in there, it'll just double book it, or it would come up somewhere saying, oh, actually this person already has a booking.
I don't remember 100%, but I believe it will permit you to double book them if that's what you choose to do. But it does display it there.
So it will display if they've got another appointment from 1400 to 1500.
Right. So that's sorry if it wasn't clear, but that's what these gray marks here are. Those are times when that person is already booked. So it is pretty easy to see, but I think maybe, you know what, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it won't let you do it. Yeah, I think it won't let you double book it from this tool here. There you go. It does keep you from double booking. that answer the question? Is that clear? Okay, good stuff. Okay, so that that is the basics of a Kanban triage and dispatch process. Definitely, there's more that could be said about some of the considerations when you're working with projects, and that's some of the stuff that we'll get into next week, and also then how do the engineers run their day, and we'll get into that in the fourth session. But yeah, that's pretty straightforward, or I should say, it's hopefully I've made it straightforward. But that's about what it is. Any questions about that before I get into some particular tips and tricks? No? All right. Well, we'll keep going then. Okay, so this is the part where I just address some questions that I've heard many times from MSPs and give you the answers. Probably you have some, at least some of the same questions. So I hear questions about how do you handle urgent work? So like sometimes some emergency priority ticket is going to come in. What do you do then? Well, um, an emergency ticket is a case where it's okay to interrupt other work. Now we definitely try to minimize that, but because emergency tickets ought to be rare, then it's really not too big of a deal if we do interrupt some work. That means that we're increasing the work in progress because uh, if we do interrupt somebody when they're working and ask them to work on something else and they haven't finished whatever they were working on before, and now they're working on something new, so that increases their work in progress by one. Uh, as long as it's a rare sort of thing, it's not a big deal. You're gonna fix the emergency, get that ticket completed, and then go back and start working on whatever it was you were working on before. Now, if emergency tickets are not rare, well, then you got a bit of a problem. Like this is all based on the assumption that emergency tickets are rare. So if these are sort of all you're doing is firefighting like this, then you might need to kind of adjust your definition of what's an emergency ticket, or maybe that indicates that you got some infrastructure improvements or some sort of improvements to kind of fix the root cause of some of these issues. Because definitely we do want them to be rare. Now, how do you notify somebody that they've been assigned an urgent work ticket? Well, just use your existing tools that you have. You probably have your team chat, or you have your phones, or you're all in the office and you can just shout over the edge of the cubicle that so and so has an emergency ticket now. So that's how you would get them assigned, and then use some typical tool to notify them that, hey, we got an emergency for you to work on. So that's how you do that. Other people have asked me about handling real-time work. And by real-time work, I mean, taking phone calls is probably the most common one. Sometimes you might also have like chat where people come to a website and they can chat at you at any time. So that would be considered real-time work as well. So a couple of techniques to handle that elegantly in a Kanban workflow are well, at first let me mention handling or offering phone support is really it's really a business decision. I mean, it's one thing just to kind of take phone calls and use not try to let it interrupt you too much. But other companies have, they make a big deal to say, if you're our customer, you can always get a technician on the phone within a minute, and they'll work with you as long as you need to get your problem solved. Okay, and that's really a premium offering. Not everybody's going to do that. So if you are doing something like that, hey, that's great. And then what I'm going to tell you probably doesn't apply because you've made a business decision that you're going to offer really terrific phone support. What I'm telling you here is if you roughly, you do take phone calls, but you kind of want to minimize it because they are an interruption, and we're talking about really working efficiently, meaning we don't want to have too many special cases here. We want to try to get everybody into our one stream of work, whether we found out about a problem by email or by phone or whatever. Like let's try to keep it fairly simple. So some techniques to be able to manage the phone without it interrupting stuff too much is to have like a round robin method of dispatching those phone calls to somebody. Excuse me. Unless you have, I should say, if you have somebody like if it's the dispatcher that takes the phone calls, then maybe this doesn't apply either. Um, the main consideration here is that you're trying to protect your engineers' time, so they're not always getting distracted by phone calls. So you can either send it always to one particular person, or you can let that role rotate around in your team either by week or maybe by day or even by could be call by call if you wanted, but doing it by day or by week would be better. I think that would limit the interruptions even more. So in that way, it could almost be like the dispatch role or triage role that might rotate through your team by day or week by week. But making sure that all the distractions go to one person for a period of time at least, make sure that the distractions don't go to the rest of your team. So that's a benefit. Um, Also, don't let the phone ring for everyone all at once, because then the phone will ring on the desk and everybody's like, I want somebody else to answer it first. So it's better if it just rings like the one person who really ought to pick it up. Then they'll know, okay, yeah, phone's ringing, it's for me, and I'll get it. Another technique to help handle phone work or other real-time work is to limit the time that you can spend with somebody on the phone, because it is valid to say, you know what, we take reports of tickets by the phone, but we don't necessarily just try to solve it on the spot. We'll talk to you for 5 or 10 minutes or whatever it takes to just make sure that we if something is really easy, then yeah, we'd love to help you solve it right there at the moment, and we'll do that for something that takes 5 or 10 minutes. Beyond that, though, we're just going to take the details of your problem. We'll make the ticket for you. We'll get it into our regular queue, and we'll get back in touch with you when we've solved it or when you've made it to the front of the queue and we phone you back to continue the troubleshooting. So that's totally fine, and especially if you've educated your users on what they should expect when they phone you, then that works really well. Another thing that you need to handle when you're doing real-time work is like sometimes you're going to have team meetings when everybody in the team is in a meeting. It might not matter too much for the daily huddle because that's only 5 or 10 minutes, and if somebody misses it because they're on the call, well, it's not a big deal because you're going to have the same daily huddle tomorrow. But you at certain times you're going to have longer meetings, half the day or the whole day or whatever it is, quarterly planning, things like that. And you definitely do want your people to be present. Those are important meetings. So what do you do during that? Well, it's okay to let it go to an answering machine or an answering service, as long as you've got a way to kind of monitor those for urgent tickets or emergencies or things that come in from some sort of VIP. So you still do need somebody to be monitoring that, but hopefully you've got some text way like email or whatever where you can see the messages that have come in and decide if you need to deal with them right at that time. Otherwise, they go into the queue and you get back to that work when the meeting is over. So that's a couple of strategies for handling that real-time work. Another thing that people have asked me sometime is to where they have a dispatcher who needs to see what's actually happening, what a particular engineer is working on at any particular time. So this would be more common if a dispatcher, maybe the dispatcher does take the phone calls and then they are going to transfer it on and they need to see what the people are working on so that they can choose somebody who's not working on something urgent to transfer that phone call on, would be one example of why you might need to do this. If that's the case, then you can actually have two columns on your Kanban board. One is for the started work and one is for the in progress. And that's where in progress actually means like in progress at this very moment. So whatever any engineer is working on at that very moment should be what's in the in progress column. The started column can be for the things that they've started, they haven't finished, they're not blocked on anything, they're just kind of waiting for time for them to get done. And those things live in the started column. Now, ideally, you're not actually going to have anything ever in the started column, but this is real life, so sometimes they might have things in the started column and in progress column. That would mean that the work in progress is at least two. But that's a technique that can let the dispatchers help them be aware of what are the distinct things that their team is working on actually at that very moment. Okay. I have a few things here that customers have asked about in the past. Another one that they ask about sometimes are handling reopened tickets. So that's something that happens in every MSP. Eventually, customers are going to respond to a ticket that has been closed, and it's going to end up reopened. Typically that would put the ticket into a reopened status. The main question that you need to answer there is, who do you want to handle those tickets? Does that go back to the dispatcher, or does that go to the engineer who was assigned to it previously when it was closed? So kind of, my personal preference is to let that go back to the dispatcher, and in that case you would assign that reopen status into the new column. However, some teams would like those tickets to go back to the technician who was assigned last. If that's the case, then they should just go into the in progress column. You would map the reopen status to the in progress column of that board, and then it would be, and it's still assigned to the engineer. So then the engineer would see that in their in progress column and observe that there's something that's been reopened, and they need to handle that. Now, obviously, that technician one is only possible if you don't have something that comes along and unassigns engineers from the closed tickets. I have seen that at some MSPs, and if that happens, then obviously your only choice is for the dispatcher. And this is actually something you could do just exclusively in TopLeft. Like you don't have to change anything in your PSA. If you've already got a system that puts those tickets into a reopened status, then this is really just a matter of mapping that reopened status to the right column in TopLeft. Okay, so some of the things that a service manager or a dispatcher are going to need to be monitoring after it's dispatched in order just to make sure that things are always flowing really well. I have a list of things that are important to monitor for. And, and by the way, this doesn't really need to be just for the service manager or the dispatcher. Really, the engineers should be watching for this sort of stuff for their own work as well. And they can do that with TopLeft because it's pretty good at finding those problems. So some of the things that you want to watch out for are approaching SLAs on tickets, or tickets where the SLA is already broken. We also want to be watching for a due date that's already passed or it's approaching. Sometimes that might happen where there's a help desk ticket with a due date, so you want to be on your guard for those things. Another one is where the amount of time that's already been logged on that ticket is approaching the budget or estimated hours, or it's already exceeded that budget, so definitely you want to be aware of that. Another one is where it's been in the column for a long time. Basically, on your Kanban board, a ticket has progressed up to a certain point and then it just stalled there and it's not progressing forward. So it's sitting in a column for too long. Now, on a Kanban board, each column can have sort of a different threshold for how long is too long. Because if it's in progress, usually you would not want a ticket to sit in progress for more than 2 days. That's kind of my general rule of thumb. You might make it 3 days or whatever, but something like that usually is what people would accept it sitting in the in progress for, maybe 2 days. Compare that though with like a waiting column. Ticket can be in the waiting column for much longer than 2 days, and it's still not a problem. So it really depends on what column we're talking about when it's been in there too long. Another thing to watch out for would be a long time without a time entry or a note added to that. So that would be a concern. It would indicate that it's just the ticket's getting ignored. Another thing that you want to watch out for is a bottleneck in your whole system. Can anybody offer a definition of a bottleneck in a system like this? This is what a bottleneck is. Nobody, no takers. Okay. A bottleneck is when it's always something that you would consider when you were talking about like a series of stages, or you can also think about it in like a computing system where data passes through certain stages. You could also consider it in like a network of roads where you take a certain route through roads, and it could be that there's one spot in this system that can has a lower kind of a lower amount of work, or a lower amount of vehicles that can go through a certain system. But the rest of the system, you know, on either side of this constraint, has a higher capacity. But but as the traffic or work flows through the system, it gets to this one spot, and the capacity of that one spot is smaller than the rest, and so um, that determines the highest possible velocity of the system as a whole. So that's called the bottleneck. And it's important to understand where the bottleneck is, because that's the only place that you can make improvements to improve the velocity of the system as a whole, right? Because you could make some improvements before the bottleneck, and you could make some improvements after the bottleneck, considering your system. But that's not actually going to improve the velocity of the system as a whole, because or work still has to go through that one bottleneck. So it's important to know where it is so that you can apply your, apply your effort to improve that in the right place. So that's why we want to know where that is. Typically in a Kanban board like this, that would be a column that gets tickets, too many tickets in it, or where tickets tend to, they tend to get to that column and then they stall. So that would be good indications of where your bottleneck is. It could be, your bottleneck could be a particular person. It could be that maybe you have only one senior engineer, and a lot of the work in your team has to go through that one senior engineer, and they're just always 100% busy. Like they don't have time to do anything else. So if that's the sort of case, and that's, by the way, that's really common in an MSP. So if that's your case, then it's really important to be able to either change up the nature of your work so that it's simpler and other people can do it, or get other members trained up so that they can take some of that load, so it can be shared. An example is actually that quote that I read at the beginning, where this one particular team had their engineer doing like their senior engineer doing junior engineer things. There's no point to do that. Senior engineers should just do senior engineers things. And so they were able to use TopLeft to figure that out, that was part of their bottleneck, and fix that by sending that junior level work to junior level engineers. And that can increase the velocity of the system there. Okay, another thing to watch out for after dispatching is too much work in progress. So that means looking at what an engineer is working at, see if they're working on too many things, and address that. So how to resolve some of these problems. Let's talk about some of the ways to do that. Some work, like I had mentioned, in this team where they had a senior engineer doing junior engineer stuff, is just to reassign the work, so move it to a less busy engineer. Another technique is swarming. You might have heard swarming in the agile context before. Basically, that's where you say to the team, look, this one particular ticket is bothering us right now. Maybe it's been open too long. We're just going to only focus on that ticket, and potentially swarming is putting multiple people working on that ticket for a certain period of time. It doesn't have to be till it's totally done, but at least until it gets unblocked and it's moving forward again. You just basically say, hey team, we have no other priority other than this one ticket. Let's get all hands on deck to fix that until it's moving forward again. And then you can go back to normal. Another way to resolve some of these problems is to suspend new assignments for an engineer. So that you would do that if an engineer has a particularly high work in progress, and you just say, you know what, we're not going to assign you any new work. We're going to give you a chance to work down that queue of work that you have there. Sometimes you need to just reprioritize the ticket. That would be to change the ranking of the ticket. That might be where a ticket has gone into it's kind of starts out its life as a normal priority ticket. It goes to the bottom of the queue, and then you maybe it sits there a little longer than you were expecting, and all of a sudden it becomes more of an urgent priority ticket. Then it gets bumped to the top because now it has some time constraints on that. So that would be to reprioritize that ticket. Sometimes to resolve some of these exceptions, you just need to remind an engineer to follow up. That could be, for example, if it's waiting on somebody else or waiting on the customer, they just need to be reminded to follow up on that ticket. Another technique is that you could split up a ticket into two smaller tickets. So that you might do if a ticket turns out to be too big. It's just kind of blows out of proportion. It's bigger than you expected. And so you want to split it up into smaller bits of work that are more manageable. Or sometimes it can be that a ticket is maybe gets to like 90% complete, but that last 10% of that ticket turns out to be kind of difficult, or maybe it needs to wait on something, getting a part in the mail or whatever it might be. It's okay to split that unfinished 10% of that work, split that into just a brand new ticket. It can go through the queue on its own. And then you can get the bigger part of that ticket, the 90% that's already done, that can actually be moved over to complete. And that's always a satisfying feeling when you can get that work into the complete column. Finally, one technique here is to reduce the scope of that ticket sometimes, or increase the budget on the ticket if there's just, there's a ticket that's got to be done and it's taking longer than expected, but you just got to do it. Go ahead and increase the budget there. And finally, it is okay to cancel that work if there's problems with the work. Maybe you just don't finish the ticket, and you do that if the business case is gone. Maybe the ticket's been open for 3 months, and you know what, it just nobody cares anymore, or the opportunity is gone. Let's just not do it. Or if you're like genuinely blocked on the client waiting for some information, something like that, and they're just ghosting you, they're not answering your questions, and you just give them a polite message to say, hey, we can do this ticket when you get back to us. For now, though, we are closing that. So that's fine too. And I wanted to make a note that as a manager, you can really minimize minimize your involvement in fixing some of these exceptions in a couple of ways. One is by looking at a lot of these problems in a daily huddle. So if those problems come out, if they're apparent in the daily huddle, then you just deal with them all in that 5 or 10 minutes in the morning, and you're done for the day essentially. As long as you don't see them come back tomorrow with the same problem, then you're done, and you can have the rest of your day back. You don't have to be watching out for those sorts of problems. And another thing is when the engineers have visibility into those problems themselves, then they can just see them and fix them. And that's another reason that Kanban board is pretty good, because the engineers get all the same visibility into these problems as the managers do. They can fix it on their own. Okay, so yeah, I just want to mention a couple of the features that TopLeft has for visualizing this sort of work. So for triage, as I mentioned, we got some fields for editing those tickets. For dispatch, I'd show you the dispatch tool and the assignment tool. You know that in TopLeft, you can drag and drop between the columns just for managing the ticket statuses. You can also drag and drop within the columns. That's how you order and rank those tickets among themselves to indicate what's the highest priority, what's the lower priority, and so on. You can actually set up automatic ordering. I haven't really mentioned much about that, but if you don't need the flexibility of putting tickets to the top or putting tickets to the bottom or in the middle or whatever, and you want to just say, you know what, I would like TopLeft to order these tickets based on, for example, a priority or the age or whatever, then that is possible in the software. And some of the really good features for pointing out what the problem tickets are for in terms of the errors about high work in progress, or being over budget, or stalling and being in one column too long, or the warnings that can approach for like approaching SLAs or approaching due dates or so on. Those are all useful. I do have a screenshot here. So this is how you'd set up some of those things. This would be in the column editor when you're editing a board and you're editing the columns. Each column has an advanced set of options. And this is how you set those up. You can set warning here to say, this would be an example of where if a ticket doesn't have a time entry within the last 2 days, because I wrote 2D, then that would be considered an error and it would show up with a red tag. Same thing with the last note. If the last note was more than 2 days ago, it would do that. The SLA here, though, it would be a warning if the SLA, the next stage of the SLA is due within the next 4 hours. You can also mark with due date timing, kind of similarly. And then a budget warning. This would show the card with an error in the budgeting once it's had 80% of the budget has been actually logged as hours on that ticket. So if it's a 10-hour ticket, when 8 hours have been logged, then that will become a warning with this setting here. Okay, so yeah, that kind of brings us to the end here. Good time. The homework for this week will be for you to use TopLeft for triage and dispatch, or if you're mostly doing project stuff, then you can be thinking about how you know a project still have some of the same problems like assigning somebody to a ticket. Well, in project world, we still need to get members assigned to do those tickets. So some of the problems are still the same as like a dispatch one. So whether you're in a help desk or project, then see what you can use TopLeft for. Try to use TopLeft for those practices, and then report back anything that you find difficult. Love to hear about that next week. And then identify and fix your service bottleneck. Try to, or project bottleneck, or whatever sort of team you're running. Think about, well, to try to use the visualizations in TopLeft to see where your bottleneck might be. If your bottleneck is a particular stage in your ticket workflow, or if it's a particular person on your team, see if you can find it and think about the sorts of things that you could do to fix that. And then next session, we'll get into Agile project management, where we'll talk about the planning and the monitoring of those projects. And again, how we fix problem tickets in the project environment. Okay, so that brings us to the end, and I am here to answer any of your questions. So after we've gone through that, what sort of questions do you have about anything there?
Probably a question unrelated to today's training, because when you showed up, there's an option that you can edit and do a few different things on the board. Does it require different licensing or the different pricing? Because I can't do that.
Yeah, it doesn't require different licensing, but it does require administrator privileges. So if you're not able to edit the board, then you won't be able to do that, but you can definitely ask
ask for the administrators to do it. Yeah.
Kind of give them some recommendations there about using some of those features.
Okay.
And by the way, on that note, we are planning some improvements to make the administrative settings more flexible, because right now it's kind of basic. You're just you're an administrator for everything or you're not, but we are going to make it a bit more flexible. We're going to introduce the concept of teams with a team manager, and then a team manager would be able to edit the boards but not do some of the more advanced administrative things like change your billing options and things like that. So we are planning some improvements, so you might be able to be a team manager and change those boards without being able to do the other things.
Okay.
Yeah, good question.
Thank you.
What else can I answer for you?
I'm not sure on our side. We'll be looking forward to the PM part of this this session. The for us here is probably from that side.
Anything confusing at all? Anything you need clarified? No? Okay, well, I'll let you think about it throughout the week, and we'll have the next session, same time, same place, and you can bring your questions there. By the way, you're always welcome to send your messages. You know what, like you could honestly, you could email them to me throughout the week if you want to, just matt@topleft.team. But you're certainly welcome to email our help desk too. We would take questions both about how to use the software or about some of these techniques that maybe you need to clarify something. Certainly we could handle that in the help desk as well. And you can email that at just help@topleft.team is our support desk. Okay, well, if you don't want to keep you longer than I need to, I appreciate your attendance here. Thank you for coming. I do wish you a very good week coming up, and look forward to seeing you next week. I'll stay on in case anybody thinks of any questions. Otherwise, you're certainly free to go. Appreciate your attendance. Have a good week.